Hello ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by Shared Services Link in association with EXL. Today we're going to be looking at the 10 things that you need to really focus on and endeavour to get right when setting up shared services. So presenting your panel, I'm one of your key speakers for today. My name is Susie West and I'm the founder and CEO at Shared Services Link, and I'm very pleased to be having with me on the speaker panel a gentleman who has been in the world of shared services and outsourcing for 20 years now and has helped a large number of organisations with their shared services implementations. This gentleman is Leo Curran. He's the SVP and Head of UK Europe at EXL. Great to have you with us today, Leo. Hello.
Hi, Susie. Thank you, and welcome everybody. Good to be here.
Thank you. The intention of this session is very straightforward, and it really is to zero in on the success factors that really need to be taken into account when setting up shared services. And I think it's very fair to say that a lot of these success factors have been provided by those people who have actually set up shared services. So the information that's shared by people who have been through this experience. So it's really very useful to be having this information at the beginning of your journey. So as we go through each of the 10, there are kind of 3 areas for us to be looking at within each of these 10 areas. The first one is for us to have a bit of a discussion as to why is this particular theme that we're discussing as one of our top 10, why is it important? And then to focus on the considerations that need to be taken into account, and then the success factors that might exist within that particular area. So the first item that we believe you need to get right when setting up your shared services organisation is the vision. So let's turn to Leo. Leo, why, in your opinion and your experience, do you think this is an important factor?
I think this is absolutely fundamental to successful creation and launch of a shared services operation. It's really that combination of matching and collating the vision between all the stakeholders involved in the organisation, whether it be a single tower to start with in the very first phase of creation, but right through to the multiple, more complex shared services operations that comes with maturity. You've got to have a shared vision, particularly as you become a delivery partner and almost, if you like, a service provider to internal stakeholders. And if you have a shared vision, then you're bringing people with you, you're managing stakeholder expectation. You can more easily, through the governance program, manage conflict, which, with a small c, which there will be, and you'll map out a much more holistic and potentially more successful and value-added process in creation of your shared services. Without the shared vision, it will be doomed for failure or at least inefficiencies, which you don't want to tolerate.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for that. And just to build on that as well, I think what the vision typically represents in any particular project of whatever size, it obviously represents the kind of the future state, and in a way it can determine the excitement behind that journey, the pace at which you get to that destination, and also clearly the direction, i.e. the roadmap that you choose to apply in order to get to that end point. So it really is the dream factor, and it's providing people with a vision is a thing that really gives people the goosebumps, and it taps into the emotional parts of their being and gets them behind this as a concept. So it really is very important to provide that vision. So some of the questions to consider are the following. But clearly, do you actually know what your vision is? What is the intention of setting up your shared services organisation? What does that vision look like? If you're actually asked to describe the purpose of your shared services organisation, or indeed your centre, to somebody, maybe an internal stakeholder or an internal customer, what words would you use to articulate the purpose and the vision? What is indeed the role of shared services according to the business? And do you have a real grasp over what the role is as far as the business is concerned? Because that will help you determine as well what your vision looks like. And really importantly, I referenced the word emotion earlier. This is the stuff that gives you the goosebumps. It is the stuff that kind of gets you out of bed with a bit more of a spring in your step in the morning. When your team wake up in the morning, what are they excited about? What are they motivated by? How does your vision for your shared services organisation actually click in to the kind of the larger vision of what your organisation is doing? So those are some of the considerations. Any other considerations that you might like to add to that, Leo?
There is another piece there. I think that setting the vision, we should also come with one eye on attracting talent internally or externally for that matter. You want your best people who are going to drive the change, to drive the value. And setting a vision that has the excitement, has the challenges, and paints the picture of a real exciting ecosystem, I think will go some way at least to underpinning the attraction of talent and the retention of talent. I think always referring back to the vision as well to make sure it's right and proper and fit for purpose is really important. So I think it's around the HR piece to help you populate your teams, your supervisory teams, and the leadership teams within that organization.
Great, and I think there's one comment that you made there as well about it's not just a vision, kind of selling the vision or communicating the vision isn't just a one-off event, it's an iterative event and doesn't just exist in the startup of shared services, it's actually something that comes in to the process of organizational improvement right the way through the maturity curve, whatever stage that you're at. So tapping into communicating the vision, articulating the vision at regular points throughout the process will help. And it will also help, coming back to Leo's point as well, he was talking about alleviating, it helps to alleviate conflicts with a small c within your organization, and having a clear vision absolutely will help you do that. So let's just touch on some of the success factors. So some of the success factors, I'd like to actually revert back to you, Leo, on some of the success factors that you've come across that have helped people really capture what the vision is.
I think, I think a lot of organizations have delivered or built their shared services around fairly blunt and not always very appealing comments from internal customers. And shared services has been seen as a successful way of resolving some of those issues from key department challenges, organizational challenges. And I think the connection with the customer, as we've described it, is absolutely important, that internal customer, to understand their needs, see what's really challenging their department or their organization is absolutely central to any shared services director and the teams reporting through to that person. So I think absolutely dialogue, connection with your internal customer and stakeholder, just as you would do with your customers externally around the world. Absolutely essential. So it's that connection, keeping it live and keeping a real live governance around those stakeholders. Whether it be multi-tower, single tower, it really doesn't matter, but that connection is for me, always uppermost to making sure the vision stays real.
Yeah, and I think as well, so once you've connected with your customer and you've understood what your customer's vision is, and I think if you can plug your own shared services vision in as tightly as you can with the vision of the organization to allow for that kind of integrated thinking, again, I think that will be very useful for you. Just a couple of other points here, or just one key point that I've kind of, you can see the word why has sprung up a lot in these last 3 bullets, and there's a very strong reason for that. Sometimes when organizations focus on the vision, they think about the what, and I think probably think about it from a consumer's perspective, so in your own lives, when you are engaged in something, is it because of the what or is it because of the why? And I'm fairly certain in most of your cases it will be because of the why. So if you can understand the why behind why you're doing the shared services in a certain way that you're doing it, and the scope is because of doing the scope in a certain way, the approach in a certain way, you're developing the actual construct in a certain way, so long as you can articulate the why, I think that will certainly help you. Now let's move on to point number 9. So the point number 9 is looking at the team that you have in place. So back to you, Leo, as to why this is important.
Thanks, Susie. Really aligned to the vision discussion. The selection and the development, the training, the coaching, and the processes that bind the team is absolutely essential to have, whether it's multidisciplinary or otherwise, to really bring about the changes and drive the efficiencies that the organization is looking for. So, without that common sense of purpose, without those core aims and goals of the organization, it's going to be extremely difficult to deliver for the internal customers. So there are 10 key things we're talking about today, but this is, for me, primary alongside the vision. Once you have the vision locked in, you get the people behind it, good selection, good development and leadership, then you're set fair to delivering for your customers. So it is an absolute essential.
Okay, good. And also, just building on that as well, I think once you've got your key team in place, what they are really delivering and conveying to the rest of the project is the culture that will permeate out from the team, from the shared services organisation, the service that will be sent out from the shared services organisation. So I think the team itself has a key impact on what the culture of the shared services organisation is going to look like. So some of the questions really to be asking yourself is, what really is the role of the team? What does the capability set within that team need to look like? What does it need to look like, and what would you actually want it to look like? Obviously, two quite different questions there. To what degree will the makeup of the team be accountants? Will 3 out of your core team be accountants, or will it be more than that? So what are the kind of, again, building on what's the experience, the training, and the capability of the team? How will your team be remunerated on success and outcome? And at what point do they know that they will actually be financially rewarded on that? I think that will help move them in a certain direction. Really critically, how empowered are they? And I know, going back to the earlier poll, there was a few people on this webinar today who were saying that they're responsible for outcome, but they're not necessarily responsible for budget. Now, I know we can't read that in black and white, but if we are to look at that, to kind of connect that with the sense of empowerment, how empowered is your team today to actually go ahead and spend money, invest money, and potentially make some mistakes along the way? I think mistakes are inevitable. How are you going to find your team? Are they from within the organisation, or are they within function? Are you going to be sourcing them from externally? And obviously, importantly, how are you going to be retaining them and developing them? Is it your long-term strategy to keep the team for long-term within the organisation, or are you accepting of the fact that they might go elsewhere into the organisation and develop after a 2 or 3 year period? And if so, what's your attitude towards that? And how will people like the kind of people that you're looking to recruit within your team? How do they want to be managed? And therefore, what kind of leadership style and indeed management style would you be looking to take with them? Now let's hand back to Leo for some of these success factors.
Yeah, let's pick up on, there's one point there just at the top of the discussion there, Susie, which I think is important. That's around the capability set, if you like, of the team. And I think very much nowadays, what we're seeing with the clients that we work with, and in situations where we're setting up our own shared services for delivery back into our customer environment, then you're really looking for that multidisciplinary skill set. So yes, you have your absolute technical specialist in finance who understand technical accounting principles and process. Then you've got a whole set of support network around that, which involves Six Sigma, Lean, and latterly much more investment around analytics as well, to really turn the shared services organization from something that's a transactional processing center into something that can create real value long term for the internal stakeholders and customers. And I think that's been the big change in the last, certainly as we're starting to climb out of recession globally, that's been the big sea change that we're seeing. So it's much more about the value you create. And yes, you've got to process and you've got to deliver accuracy in the processing, but it's much more about the art of the possible and how you can get beyond the KPIs simply in a contract relationship. So I think that's the big sea change that we're seeing.
And again, just to build on that as well, and how it locks into the vision, as you were talking about there, Leo, is if you've got a kind of a clear view as to what that vision looks like, because is the vision of your shared services purely transactional, or are you actually endeavouring to set up shared services to move to global business services? Each of these responses to these separate questions will have an impact on the kind of team that you actually want around you. So they're all very tightly linked in. Let's move on to the 8th point, looking at the scope and approach when you're setting up your shared services. Back to Leo as to why this is important, please.
Yeah, sure. Look, there's a number of paradigms here. You have, as you pointed out here, you've got the geographical, spatial platform, where language dependencies, cultural dependencies, the scale of the organization in those geographies, and then functionally. A lot of organizations will start with 1 or 2 functions, finance and accounting being seen as the more mature of the processes that can be placed in the shared services organization under the control of the finance director or the CFO. Then you're moving into, process perspective discussions. Now, latterly what we're seeing is more and more organizations want to go for a much more large scale, much more impactful change in shared services. So they will tend to go for a functional move rather than just a process move. But it really depends on the culture and the stage you're at in your business development and aspect and the vision you share. But most people we're working with right now are really about taking whole functions and moving them into a shared services organization to get faster impact at a better scale of economy. So that all of these things need to be taken into account. And then critically, when you're looking at the geography and the functions that you want to move into a shared service organization, go back to the discussion we just had in point 9. Do you have the talent locally? If you don't have it locally, can you support it with supplementary teams elsewhere in your global network? So all of these considerations have to be taken into account, but properly planned, properly governed, proper change control in place, then it's eminently feasible for this to be delivered very successfully.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So it sounds like there are a lot of organisations that are embracing an entire function and looking to migrate it into shared services. Again, this will come back to the culture of your organisation and what the relationship with risk is within your organisation. So when you look at the roadmap and the approach that you're looking to take in order to get to your vision, are you looking to take small and safe steps? Are you looking to take a big bang approach? Are you looking to compress the roadmap into, say, 12 months rather than, say, a 24-month period? Is it your view that you'd actually like to take the larger countries first? And how do you determine large? Is that in terms of people? Is it in terms of revenue? Is it in terms of volume of transactions? Okay, so now let's have a look at the success factors that you also need to take into account as well when looking at the scope and approach. So let's revert back to you, Leo, here.
Sure. For me, I think the key point here is try and find advocates amongst the stakeholders in your organisation they're still going to have some nervousness and there's still going to be some risk in their mind about this big change. And let's face it, this is going to be a big change if you're not already doing it. But bring them along with you as your shared services leadership or the board leadership who want to implement this program, and find the quick wins. Quick in shared services could still be a couple of years or 18 months, but that's still fast in terms of the transition of this type. But if you bring those people with you, they become the advocates, the evangelists internally, and then you can start to work on areas geographically or by function that perhaps are a little bit more resistant to change. And look, for good reason. There could be all sorts of reasons, economic, social, financial. But if you've already got a body of evidence that says it works, and it works well, and that the service providers within that internal organization are really listening to their customers and are aligned to the vision, who have a dynamic team with top talent attracted, then you're setting yourself up to really drive big change in the organization by adopting other processes and other geographies and other functions. So I think try and find an area of less pain with advocates who will get behind you for the change program, and I think that will be the foundation for success.
And again, just building on that, I think at the early stage of shared services, there are lots of people within the organization that are looking at how this is going to work. There'll be people who are naysayers, they're skeptical of the whole program, they may be very reluctant to be losing their local activities. So they'll be almost waiting for the shared services director and the shared services team to trip up. And if that actually is fulfilled, that can be very damaging for the reputation of the shared services organisation, and it can be very damaging for the credibility. And then you'll possibly have to go through an exercise of rebuilding trust. So coming back to Leo's point, I think it's extra important to make sure that you are migrating nice and early the countries which are relatively kind of straightforward, but you know that they will provide a quick win for this programme. So let's come on to the 7th point within our discussion, which is a conversation around the delivery construct for shared services. Back to you, Leo, as to why this is important.
Absolutely essential. And before we go into this, I think also that this whole discussion, point 7, begs the question about where the shared services division or business reports to. Who owns it? Is it the CFO? Is it the Chief Operations Officer? Is it a newly created designation called the Shared Services Director? If so, who does she or he report to? Is it a board report? Is it a board position? So I think that overarching question needs to be resolved in your organisation, and it can be any one of those. And I've seen combinations. So there's no right or wrong, but it has to be considered. But increasingly, we're seeing that the shared services business does have a voice at the board level, one way or the other. So that's really important. So the discussion really focuses on where you are in your processes, in your functions, in terms of maturity, location. Some of you may have the real estate, the talent already in place to start to build that shared services vision without too much disruption, because you've got that foundation business and that foundation team to add to, bringing in processes and functions from around a geography, a region, a continent. So a lot of people can look internally to really see some quick wins and to see how advanced they really are already, actually, and they're already in a good place to start. Others, particularly if they're entering new geographies, have to consider, greenfield, building something brand new, acquiring new buildings, big hiring programs, big transition programs. So it just really depends on how mature your functions are. But all of those considerations have to be made. And but key to me around all of this, around the construct, is that leadership position. Into which bucket does it sit, and does that person have the voice and the support of the board?
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. I think it's really important at an early stage to be thinking about what the delivery construct looks like in terms of how you're going to be working with an outsourcing partner. Many of the 6,000-7,000 shared services organizations that exist in the world today have an outsourcing relationship. Either it is completely outsourced, so a whole function, a whole process will be outsourced. So, for example, the whole of accounts payable will be outsourced, or they might have done an assessment at the design phase of shared services to understand a process fully and then truncated that process to appreciate which parts can be outsourced to a third party and which parts they might, for a particular reason, want to remain as captive and operating within the captive shared services. So I think looking at the delivery construct, appreciating what an outsource can actually bring to the table at a very early stage, I think is actually will serve you. Also looking at the other models that exist out there. So there's obviously just moving to a shared services organisation, be it captive, hybrid or involving outsourcing. There's moving to a model that involves competency centres and also centres of excellence. So this is representative of organisations that really have moved more into what people term as the value-adding part of the function. And then there's also this evolving or evolution, if you will, into the realm of global business services, where we now see probably up to about 1,000 of the 7,000 shared services organisations globally considering global business services and appreciating what global business services actually is, and looking at their footprint to support the global business services construct that they're looking to examine. So see that these are all questions to be thinking about nice and early in the journey. Looking at the success factors, again, determining what your footprint will be looking like has a big kind of consideration for where you'll be choosing your locations. Obviously will be the pull of the business and where your customers are and where your plants are. That will have a pull, but also the talent that exists within those locations. So looking at India as an offshore site, the different parts of the country offer different capabilities. So making sure that you're engineering your entire or a large part of your talent kind of plan to support that footprint is built around the talent availability across the world. So thinking about that nice and early. Other success factors from you, please, Leo.
Yeah, sure. I'll just go back to one here. You mentioned the hybrid model. Increasingly, there is a real appetite to blend the best of all worlds, I think. The best of the third-party relationship, the best of the internal capability and structure that people have, especially for the larger organizations with multi-geography, multi-footprint. There's a real skill set now and experience out in the market for combining the best of everything. So the nearshore, the offshore, the third-party delivery partnership, which brings agility, speed, and scale. But to link that into the common vision with the internal system. So there's a tremendous lot of choice on the buy side. But again, it all has to be linked up to that vision. And if that vision is sound and solid from the outset, then it really can be a real success story.
Now let's move on to point number 6. This relates to the platform that is needed within your shared services organization. Let's have a look at why a discussion around your ERP is important. Over to you, Leo.
Thanks, Susie. I think a lot of organizations who've got mature ERPs are really looking not for a wholesale re-platforming change program, but to really squeeze and evolve what they already have. And what we're seeing is that people are trying to adopt non-invasive tools, technologies and enablers, mobile apps in certain industries, for example, to stay in touch with their customers, to affect faster payment, to get their invoicing more accurate, to make it very, very targeted, and to make sure there's not too much default on payments and so on. So I think there's been a big sea change there. A lot of companies are just not willing to invest the millions for a big change program, but will work with our ERP suppliers and a host of niche players around that to build and to modify and to evolve something that is much, much more fit for purpose, whether it be in the shared services finance function or additional towers as well. So in the last 36 months or so, there's been an accelerated trend towards that new ecosystem, which we're seeing.
I mean, an ERP implementation is often the largest investment that a finance organization will make within a generation, and it really is a sizable investment for a company to be making. I think especially now that we're kind of on this path where organizations are really looking to move to as close to a single instance as possible. So increasingly we're seeing organizations, between 30 and 40% of shared services organizations either endeavouring to work off a single instance or working off one. So, and it's quite interesting because an ERP implementation and shared services, they often go hand in hand. So one kind of triggers an evaluation of the other. So I think questions to consider are clearly, what ERP best suits your business, and are you going to be looking to consolidate your ERPs or do an ERP implementation at the same time as shared services, just after shared services, or prior to shared services? What's the approach that's the best one for you? And who will own the ERP implementation? I think that's a key question, and how connected is that to shared services? We are seeing now increasingly that the shared services director owns an ERP upgrade, but to what degree do they have some kind of influence and ownership over the actual ERP implementation and decisions itself? So let's touch briefly on success factors, please. Over to you, Leo.
Sure. There's one that stands out that's not perhaps articulated here, but it's implied, and that's you must have the experience in your organization if you're going through such a change program. There's nothing like some people who've been through this type of change program in the past. There will be challenges, everybody knows that, but to have people driving the program and leading the program with the vital experience is absolutely a necessity. And we're seeing organizations who are waiting to attract that talent and employ that talent before they're going to embark on that major sea change. So that's critical. And it comes back to people, which seems to be a recurring theme on this discussion this afternoon. Limitations, absolutely. It will do what you want it to do in terms of performance, but you've got to be very clear what you want and how it's going to support the shared services organization. And it goes back to the vision, the goals, the KPIs, and the clients internally you're trying to service. And that's all got to be taken into account when you're considering the changes in the investment.
Thank you. Let's move on to point number 5. We're just beyond halfway through this, so we'll move through the final 5, touching on enabling technologies. So let's move directly into the kind of questions to consider. I think this is quite an important point. At what point do you start thinking about enabling technologies? Do you start thinking about enabling technologies when you have you've gone live with your shared services, you've stabilized for a bit, and then you're into continuous improvement? Or do you actually start building the kind of the development and the architecturing, if you will, for the enabling technologies nice and early when you actually start out in shared services? What does your roadmap look like? Where are the key milestones? And you may have, for your enabling technologies, you may have 30 or 40 different technologies on the boil at any one time. So how do you determine what to prioritize on that roadmap, and what will be the kind of the driver that makes you focus on that first rather than in 12 or 18 months' time. Over to you, please, Leo, for any other questions to consider.
Yeah, I think one key enabler to help answer this question to anybody that's trying to wrestle with this question is to take some time to identify the maturity or otherwise of your processes in scope. It's not an exact science, but if you can work through a maturity model to understand process, development, efficiency or otherwise, you'll be able to build a real flight path that's very, very accurate and that will allow you to make those decisions around the enabling technologies in a much better steady state. And we've seen that time and time again, and we work with clients all the time on trying to identify process maturity. And it's absolutely fascinating and proven how it can help you increase the performance and the efficiency and the getting things right first time factor when you bring in these other enablers and technologies. So look at the maturity or otherwise of your processes, and then the story will sit in there and it will tell you almost, it will guide you how to apply the technologies, which technologies you might want to consider to beef up your efficiencies, and it will also tell you where you can save your money. You'll decide that some processes really don't need to be changed or don't need to be invested in so much more because the return on the investment is so much smaller than elsewhere in the organization.
Okay, good. Let's move to our point number 4, which is the point around governance. So back to you, Leo, as to why this is so important.
This is, for me, alongside the vision, this is the real be-all and end-all of a big change program and the sustainability of a shared services organization. If you get the governance program right, you involve the right stakeholders, and you have the right level of exec commitment, then almost anything is possible within the shared services organization. Without that comprehensive governance model, then it will be extremely challenging to bring about the changes. If you're going through a second phase, for example, we talked earlier on in the afternoon about the early stage, quick wins, advocates, evangelists. Once you've done all of those, how are you going to tackle the naysayers, the people who've got more resistance, and they may have very good reason for that resistance, without good governance? And governance really is much more about the future and creating value than necessarily about looking backwards at what failed or didn't go so well. Yes, there'll be an element of that, but really it's about innovation, it's about the future and evolving the shared services. And it's critical for those that might be seeing shared services as a gateway into global business services, which, as you've just touched upon, a lot of organizations are looking at now to really bring in even higher value processing and the higher value towers into a shared services organization. So this, for me, is where projects or business units will fail or succeed.
Okay, so I think it's a partnership, and I think that's really important for shared services organisations to see that the actual customer, your partner, actually has a very important role to play in the success of the shared services organisation. So I think having them involved right from the off and right at the beginning of the journey, so that they understand exactly what to expect from you and obviously why, and also what's their role in the success, so that they have an understanding that they have some kind of skin in the game as well, and that they have a responsibility to be a good and a proactive partner as well. So articulating where the handover points are, where accountability sits, and how all of that accountability will be made visible and will be shared. Do you have owners who are fully accountable within your organisation? We touched on process ownership earlier. A lot of shared service organisations are moving to the process ownership model. They may have had it before, but now they're making these ownership frameworks much tighter. And how are you actually governing change? How does change and improvement, how is that governed within your organisation? And how are you governing the users from a day-to-day perspective, so that you're actually governing that all these improvements that the shared services organisation is pushing out there are actually being managed and acted upon by the users? So just touching on some of the success factors, back to you, Leo, for some of the success factors, please.
Seniority and involvement at the very highest level, and sponsorship from the board. I think that's important for the governance. Involvement of all stakeholders who are delivering the services at the leadership level, and of course full lock-in with the customers. If you have that combination, then you're setting yourselves up for success.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the third point, which is the change management and communication plan, which shouldn't always be bundled together. They are actually separate entities, but we'll look at them together for the benefit of this webinar. So back to you, Leo, as to why this is important.
Well, once you set your goal and your vision, and you have your team identified or at least outlined, then it's about bringing those people with you and about bringing the business with you, the business unit owners, the stakeholders. And in any change management program, whether it be ERP, whether it be people or process change, and in shared services, all three of those, you need good change management skills and rigor, and communications there, open and transparent, has to be from the outset. If you bring that to play, then you're going to bring even the most doubting organizations or parts of the organization will come with you, at least to understand and hear the sincerity and the business case that you put forward. Without that, there will be fear, there'll be gossip, there'll be just lots of things that combined will just undermine the successful start of your change program in the shared services organization. So absolutely paramount is communication and the rigor around that.
It's quite interesting that a lot of shared services leaders and directors who may not have the bandwidth to actually run the change management aspect of their shared services are actually being made responsible for the change management aspect of the shared services campaign, and thinking about the sometimes traumatic effects that shared services can have on an organization in the short term. There's obviously a recovery period, and then there's building into all the benefits that come out of shared services, but for a moment it could be highly traumatic, and it's a very emotional period for a company to go through. It's often talking about people's jobs and therefore people's lives, and the shared services director just might not have either the capability or indeed the the headspace, the bandwidth to actually manage the change part of the shared services program. So I think really making sure that there's ready and available and enough resource for that in your leadership team or plugged into the leadership team somewhere, so that the change management aspect of your shared services can be resourced and equipped properly. So I think that's key, and also just building a change management program and being so confident that any change that has been communicated out into the organization has landed correctly and it's landed in the way that you'd want it to land. So often we can say things and then we ask the listener what's just been said to them and it's been interpreted in a completely different way. So making sure, using particular communication techniques, that the information that has been shared has landed in the way that you would like it to land. Also, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. It's so that we can be very good listeners and ask lots of questions, and understanding that a huge part of change management and communication is about asking questions and listening, so that your customer feels cared for and handheld through the experience. I think as well, just looking at a slightly separate aspect of this is the marketing of your shared services organisation. And when we're talking about marketing, we're not just talking about let's just get a nice logo and let's just have a nice mission statement. It's more than that. It's really about the face of your organisation. So what's the brand of your organisation, and how are you actually proactively marketing the shared services organisation out to the business so that it's seen as a centre of good, it's seen as a place where exciting things happen, it's not seen as a nuisance part of the organisation, it's seen as a part of the organisation which is instrumental for the company to retain and develop its competitive edge. Back to you for success factors, please, Leo.
One at the top would be, just as we spoke, is to have a multidisciplinary team. You have your HR function, you have your key business unit leaders and stakeholders. That combined coalition is very, very powerful. And if you ask yourself for one moment and hesitate that should so-and-so be involved, then involve them, because probably they should be, even if they make a small contribution. If nothing else, the ripple effect through their business unit or their function or their process owners, that they have actually been asked an opinion to be involved, and when you involve somebody, then and teams of people, you're in a much better place to try and be successful.
Okay, great. Moving on to the second and penultimate point, we're looking at the continuous improvement system. So we're not actually talking about technology here, but we're talking about the a system and the framework that you've got in place to see that continuous improvement is part of your mindset. So Leo, why is this important at the beginning of the shared services journey?
It just sets the pace and the whole tone and the cadence of the shared services organization. Once upon a time, it was about transactional processing repeatedly at a lower cost, at a little bit more efficiency, but now it's much, much more than that. It's much more than business as usual. It's really about creating value, and not always innovation. It can be just value, looking for better ways of doing things, always keeping in mind, however, how that impacts the customer. If you can close that loop and have the customer feedback involved in there, then your continuous improvement programs, with all the tools and technologies and capabilities at your fingertips, whether it be lean right through to mobile apps, right through to analytics and everything in between. If you can join all that up and put it at the disposal, or if you like, the review of the customer, and work with your internal customers, then you'll be creating value all the time. And let's face it, the shared services organization constantly has to justify its investments, because it is a cost center, and its viability. And there's only one way of doing that, and that's by continually moving the value further and further ahead and building on strong customer sats within your organization.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. I think as well, I mean, continuous improvement means different things to different people. So I think articulating with yourselves and with your team, what does continuous improvement look like for us today and this year, and how do we know that we've been successful in continuous improvement? Also, embedding continuous improvement within your people, does that mean you want all of your people to be natural problem solvers, or do they have to have first, second, third level of continuous improvement mindsets, and then other people in the organization have fourth, fifth, and sixth? So how kind of penetrative do you want a continuous improvement attitude to be? How do you actually look for that continuous improvement attitude? What are the things that you look out for in your interviewing and your recruitment process? So these are all things to look out for. And also just how are you actually going to build a system to determine what continuous improvement looks like, to determine what the roadmap looks like and how you prioritize various continuous improvement initiatives, and how you can actually report back on that continuous improvement success. So that is your system that you set up to kind of hold all of that in a very steady place. Now let's move on to the final point for the day. Now, this really, you can circle this right back to point number 10 that we started at the top of this webinar, which was around vision. So the point number 1 is around alignment. Why is this so important, Leo?
It's about keeping the whole shared services organization relevant, Susie, and I think here we can talk about KPIs and we can talk about goals across the functions, and absolutely essential to the strong and rigorous shared services organization. But alignment is an ongoing thing. You set alignment in 2014. It will change, and if SLAs and KPIs aren't working, they're measuring the wrong things, or they're challenging and creating the wrong behaviors, then it's great to change it through the governance model. Sit down with your stakeholders, sit down with the customer, and work out and recalibrate which KPIs, what objectives are going to suit you better, and evolve the function. Do not expect it to be what it always was, because it'll lose relevancy, it'll lose efficiency, and it'll just become another big lump of cost in an organization with little created value. So my experience is, and working with a lot of customers on this, is welcome the chance to recalibrate those, and you can change them. They're not fixed in concrete, but make them alive to the changing business needs of your customers and technologies and the enablers that you're bringing to bear to make their world much better.
Okay, great. And absolutely, I think what was captured there in Leo's response as far as this is a kind of a continuous communication channel that is forever open, and people's expectations and their desires and their requirements, they change constantly. So it's not a static piece of information that you can kind of refer back to kind of 2 or 3 years down the track, because it constantly changes. So coming back to one of the earlier points around communication, that's why it's really important to keep that communication channel nice and open, to diarise those meetings so that they constantly take place with the C-suite or the senior management team or your key customers, your customers, to find out what's important for them, how are their needs changing, how is their business requirements changing. And I also think just checking in with the C-suite as often as you can, the senior management team, to find out as well, where does the organisation want to be in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months time? What's important right now so that I, as a shared services director, can help us get there more elegantly? Is it about saving costs? Is it about providing more insightful data? Is it about releasing cash so that we can acquire companies in new markets? What is important for the company, and how can I best support the organisation in its intentions? We've got Leo back actually in about 2 weeks' time for our next webinar, which is looking at are BPOs really keeping up with the pace of change? That's great. And a webinar taking place in September looking at the DHL story. The Global Process Owner Summit that we've got in September will absolutely help you if you are looking to build an end-to-end controllership, if you will, of various processes within finance, within HR. This one in particular is looking at finance. So do join us for that. Many thanks to Leo for his time and his insight. Many thanks to you for your time, and I look forward to welcoming you at the next webinar. Thank you and goodbye.